All right, guys. Welcome to How to Make Money on eBay. First thing you're going to do is pull out all the old baseball cards you have in your attic, and we're going to put those online. No. We're here today to talk about developing dynamic SSIS, and this is really multifold, different ways that you can do it. Many of you are probably doing a lot of the things I'm about to show you. I may suggest a different way to do them. There's really not one way to do dynamic SSIS. It's essentially what we're trying to do is make it so that you can have one package that maybe does many different things. At the nutshell, that's what we're trying to do. This is a little more bad humor if I haven't given you enough already. So like I mentioned, we're a software company as well. One of the things that we do is we do DTS conversions. We have a tool that does that. This is some of our bad ad campaigns that we had to pull off some sites. How big is your package? You probably can't even see that, can you? Let me get a zoom it here. So these are some of our bad ad campaigns that we've had here. How big is your package, with the woman with a suggestive face there. We have top 10 reasons why you should manually convert DTS to SSIS because Satan told you so. And then this is my favorite here. Should be animated. Yeah, there we go. Buy our tool or Brian Knight will steal your soul. Completely a joke. Just something to give you a little humor to start off with. So someone's opened their mouth. Are you serious? We didn't really use those. So again, what we're going to try and do is overall just make your packages dynamic so they can do multiple things at once. The way we're going to do that is we're using expressions and variables that are built into SSIS. We're also going to talk about configuration files, which I heard a couple guys talking about a moment ago. And I have some recommendations. Files are good, but also to use configuration tables as another option. That's my preferred method, actually. I don't know why I didn't put that there. We're also going to talk about passing values between parent and child packages. So if you have one package that runs a bunch of other packages, you could actually pass a value using a certain type of configuration. And then if we have time, it's a pretty lofty schedule there, but if we have time, we'll talk about using DTExec, which is the command line tool for running SSIS packages, and show you how you can actually pass in variables into that. Okay. So the reasons for making dynamic SSIS packages: no hard coding. Make it so that everything's dynamic. You can make changes to it from outside of the package. If you develop this package, you could easily input things into it without having to open up the development environment. So after you create a package that has variables, whatever that variable is assigned to do, you can actually tell it whenever you run the package how you want to manipulate it, if you want to change the value of it or whatever you want to do. So I say use variables whenever possible. Now there are some cases where you need to be careful because especially when it comes to things like the data flow and your sources. Be careful with, when I say make as much as dynamic as possible, be really careful when it comes to the data flow because they're really rigid. The data flow is rigid. If you try and add new columns and take away columns and things like that, you could potentially have some problems with your package later if you're making it dynamic so that even the column names can change and things like that. Use variables to build expressions. So variables and expressions kind of go hand in hand a lot of times. When you have variables, you could use expressions, and we're going to take a look at expressions here in a moment if it's a totally new topic to you. But you can use those expressions to actually build up variables and store all of that logic that you've built using the expression language inside of SSIS in those variables. We'll talk about child packages. I already mentioned that. In configuration files or tables. That was like a complete duplicate of the slide before. So the SSIS expression language, it's sort of similar to C#. What I usually tell people, if you know C# and you know T-SQL, it's like those two had an all-night kegger and they produced this SSIS expression language. It's really funny. A lot of people, this is one of people's biggest complaints, is you have reporting services, you have analysis services, and SSIS, and they all use a different kind of expression language. That's the case with the SSIS one as well. So there's a whole other one to learn. Luckily, they give you a lot of kind of built-in tools that help you in learning it. They work together with variables. Wow, these are really repetitive. And the things that they can be used on, you can use them on tasks inside of SSIS. So each of your tasks, you can dynamically change the properties that are inside of them. So if you, let's say you have a file system task that moves a file. Well, you could use expressions to dynamically change where it moves it, which really would be done on the connections. So you could build expressions on your connections. So let's say you need to loop over a set of files. then you could build an expression on your connection. So if you're doing a looping operation, that connection can change each time. You can also do it on variables. Again, that's kind of repetitive. I think I've said that like 4 times now. But on variables, you could actually build all the logic that you have inside of that expression that you're writing and have it stored on the variable, and you can use that variable anywhere else inside the package. The disadvantage, you can get expression happy. If you have expressions all over the place, it can be really difficult to actually manage those when you get to a point where you have them on almost every single task. And many of you may be already familiar with that. If you've dealt with expressions before, it's really hard to know which task you have them on, because you don't know which task you have them on until you go digging in it and then looking at the expressions tab and then looking at what's inside there. So let me show you what I mean here. I'm going to open up our development environment here. I think all of you said that you're not brand new to SSIS, so I'm going to make the assumption you know where I'm at right now. If you don't, please let me know. I won't make fun of you, I swear. So what we're going to look at is some of the different places where you can put expressions. And really I want to show you how it's so difficult after you build those expressions to know where you've done them. A lot of tools, a lot of third-party companies have developed things that will help you know where those are ahead of time without you having to dig through them, including our company. I'm not going to bring up our company as far as third-party tools here, but I want to show you how you can do all these things natively first. So I'm inside the control flow, and I will try and zoom in as much as possible here when I have something to actually show you here. I'm inside the control flow, and I mentioned I want to show you each place where you can actually build expressions and make that package dynamic. So the first place I want to show you is on a task. So you have all these tasks that you have in your toolbox. And I know anytime I do the intro session for this, I always ask, the biggest and hardest part about learning SSIS is knowing when to use which one. Because if you're just picking up SSIS, it's pretty intimidating to see all these different tasks, especially if you're coming from DTS, the predecessor to SSIS. They had 12 tasks. Now you have almost 80 different tasks to deal with. So let's take my example I said earlier. I said I have a file system task, which if you are new to SSIS, what this task will do, it can move a file, copy a file, delete a file, rename a file. It does mostly anything with files for you. So what I'm going to do in this task, and really all I want to show you, is in just about every single one of the tasks that you have available, you're also going to have this little expression tab here that's available. And what this is going to do is every single one of these properties that I see here on the right-hand side, that's my right, yeah, it's my right. Is that your right too? Yeah, it's your right. Every single one of those properties can change dynamically based on an expression that I write. Now let's take a real quick look at what that expression language looks like. So if I click on this expression page on the left and hit the ellipsis here, I can then select any one of those properties that I have inside this task. So whether the file operation that I'm doing, by the way, sometimes these are named differently. Sometimes even, and I think in this case it is different. Let me show you this real quick. The different operations that I have here, the different kind of file operations I can do, each of those, although they look like they're text, is actually represented by some kind of number. So whenever I'm writing the expression, I need to know, and you got to kind of play trial and error to figure out which one it is. I'm sure it's documented online. But each of these is represented by a number. So if I write an expression and I want to dynamically change what I'm doing in this particular task, I need to have the output be a number. All right, so in this expression language here, I'll select the property I want to manipulate. I'm just going to say the description just to make it easy. It's just the description of the task. And then inside the expressions, this is where you actually design the expression that you're going to use. So you're going to write code, and luckily they've given you a bunch of different functions on the right-hand side to help you out with doing it. So you don't have to know expressions inside SSIS right away. There's a lot of help in trying to figure out which one does what. In fact, when you highlight each of them, if I expand these guys here on the right, when I click over them, let's get one that's a little bit more useful. Length, here we go. Anytime I click on one, it's going to give me a description telling me exactly what it does. So if I'm just learning this, there is help out there. It's not me trying to figure it out from scratch. Okay, it's built into the tool. It's already built into it. So let's say, for example, I want to make this description dynamic where it has the current date on it. So the way I could do that, and here we will see a little bit of carryover with T-SQL. What do you guys think? How can I get the current date? What was that? Get date, yeah, absolutely. So right now, I'm putting get date on the description property. So if I try and evaluate this right here, so this evaluate expression will actually show me what is going to be evaluated by whatever code I wrote, right? If I hit evaluate expression, I'm going to get this error message. Let's use some common sense. What's wrong with what I've done so far? If you can read it. Yeah, it's a date, and I'm trying to shove it into a property that it can only take a string value. So these are a lot of the steps that you're going to have whenever you're building expressions and you evaluate expressions. A lot of times it has to do with the data types you're going to have issues with. And when we look at variables here in a moment, I'll show you one kind of technique I use to help out with this. So I know ahead of time what the data type is that I'm dealing with. So because I'm dealing with I need to make it a string data type, I need to do some kind of typecasting or conversions. And there's actually a typecast right here that's going to handle all my conversions. So one thing that's really fun with SSIS is there's not a lot of carryover with data types as well. So you see all these different data type names that may not mean diddly squat to you if you're coming from a just SQL background where you know all the data types in SQL Server, but when you see this in SSIS, that doesn't mean squat to you. Well, you can look up online and figure out what they are. A lot of them are Unicode. Some of them are different because there's Unicode, and then there's the yeah, exactly. So a lot of these you can figure out pretty quickly what they do. In our case, we want to convert to a string, and we have two possibilities down here. There's W string, and then there's string. Anybody know what the difference is? Unicode. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So Unicode again. So one's going to have the only real difference as far as configuration. The non-Unicode one I have to give a code page to. So 1252 for Western European, or I can't imagine what else you may have, but maybe there's a chance you have some other kind of code page you deal with. So in my case, I'm going to make this simple. I'm just going to bring over the Unicode one. It doesn't really matter because this is just changing the property of my description. And then I need to give it a character length. So how long is my get date going to be? How long do you guys think? 10? It's probably how long I want it to be. Oh. How long do you think it really is?
55 and work backwards.
18.
What was that? 55 and go backwards? That's probably the better approach.
19.
19? Still low?
33.
I heard someone say 30?
23.
23? Oh, it's still low. I heard 30 back there. It's actually 29. 30 was pretty close. Oops. So if I use 29, I'll see exactly how long my get date is. So I have this pretty long, I don't know why in the world I would need all that time values there, but I do have quite a bit as far as the time values. Now, I could do some other things in here where I could convert it to just a database date, where I don't care about the time and I just want the date. There's some other functions in there so I could convert it and only bring back the date. In fact, let's do that real quick. So there is a DB date right here. If I drag that, all of these you can drag and drop. If I drag that in front of my get date, first it'll convert it to date time. I'm sorry, just a date, and then it'll convert it to W string. By the way, before I do that, let me show you if I had done 28, it would not work. So 28 is not quite long enough. I had truncation. 29 will work. But now when I add this conversion to date, it doesn't even need to be that long. It can be, what is that, 12? Yeah. So I can get away with a lot more when I have to do multiple expressions at a time. So what I'm trying to show you here is, you can build the expressions. Right now I'm building it on kind of a silly property here. I'm just trying to show you the fact that you can build them on properties. So any property that you have inside of a task can be dynamically changed. Now this one may make a little bit more sense when you're actually trying to create a file. So if I'm creating a file, and this is an example we'll show later, I likely want to have, or many of you probably have a circumstance where you do this, I want to have that date appended onto the end of it, so I know what date this file was processed. We'll take a look at an example of that here in a moment. Okay. Now this is one just kind of really annoying thing about expressions, is you have no idea that you have an expression on that task unless you go digging into it. So unless I go open it, go to expressions, then go over here, you see it in your properties here on the right as well. But unless I go digging into it, I still don't know I have an expression until I hit the ellipsis here. That's just one kind of annoying thing. All right. Again, the other places you can do this are on your connection managers. So let's show an example of one of those. I think I'm getting out of order in my presentation, but that's okay. So with my connections that I have, these are all, again, if you're new to SSIS, these are just the connections that I'm trying to make to whatever, whether it's a file, a database, Excel sheet, whatever you want to do. These connections I have on the bottom are how I'm going to either extract data or load data or move a file, whatever. So in the bottom, if I create a connection, and let's say it's a file connection, if I want to make it so I can loop over a set of files or make it so that that connection, that one connection, can change dynamically, there's a property, or there's properties that I can manipulate so that it can change for me. So I'm going to create this connection really quick, and I'm going to give it some kind of file to work with here. I'm going to hard code a file first, and then we're going to kind of take that and make it dynamic. So let's see. Here we go. Oops. That's SSIS. There we go. So file 1 is the name of my file. And inside this file, I have names and then the state that they came from. And I have a bunch of files that are exactly the same. And I want to loop over every single one of those files. They're not all the same. The data is not the same, but the metadata is. All the columns are the same. The data types are the same, just the data is different. So I want to take those files and I want to loop over each one of them and then land them in one spot. And I don't want to create 4 or 5 different packages for it. I want to create one package and one set of tasks that can handle all of it. So I'm definitely jumping ahead in our demo, but I brought it up, so might as well take a look at it. So I've created a connection to that file. I'm going to ditch this file system task. Now I need to set it up to actually load. I want to take that file and load it. So to do that, I'm going to use the data flow task. And in my data flow task, I'll have a source that points to that file. In my destination, I'm going to kind of use a temporary destination just so we can get, oops, sorry, should be a flat file source. Why didn't you guys catch me on that? Come on. Flat file source. Captured my file there. I got my columns. I'm going to make this the data flow as simple as possible. I'm going to have a file and a source. A source and a destination, and I'm even going to have kind of a temporary destination here. I'm going to use a union all as a destination. The reason I do this, and this is really kind of a development technique, when you're developing your packages and you don't want to constantly be loading your table, your actual table, I use a union all just so I can not land data anywhere. I just want to try and test everything before that destination. So if I run this right now, it's going to take those 3 files and load them into thin air. If I actually can get it to run. Come on. Shouldn't be that hard to run that one. There we go. All right, so it right there took my 3 files out of my source, put them in my destination. It'll say it's just my temporary destination for now. But what I want to do is I want to take this and make it so that not just one file is loaded, but all of my files are loaded. So it's going to look at that directory, take all those files, and load each one of them individually. Now there's 2 ways you can do it. There's one connection manager called a multi-flat file, which will actually take multiple files for you. And then the other method, which will allow you to do a little bit more logic with it, is the for each loop. Anybody used the for each loop before? So what the for each loop will do, in case you haven't, it'll take a set of files, and or not just a file, it'll take a collection of items, let's call it that, and it'll loop over each one and perform the same action over and over. Whatever I drag inside this little box here, inside the container, it's going to do that over and over and over for each collection of items that I have, or for each item that I have in a collection. Okay, it's giving me a little warning here. Let me see if I can make that go away. Okay, beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. I watched one presentation one time where a guy said it's a beautiful thing every couple minutes. So I'm going to make sure I input that as much as possible into this presentation. So what we want to do is I want to tell this for each loop where the file location is, and then I want it to bring me back all of those files, and it's going to bring them back to me individually. So one at a time, it's going to give me the file name, and then I'm going to use this connection manager I have on the bottom to change which file it's pointing at. So it's going to dynamically change each time it goes through that loop. So to do this, we need to use a couple variables. I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, but this is one of the more entertaining demos to see, so let's get it out of the way so I can have a complete landslide from here on out. So to do this, we're going to create a couple variables that's going to point to the location of our files. And we're going to use a variable to pull back those files individually. So I'm actually just going to create one variable right now. And my recommendation is when you create variables, anybody a developer in here? Like a .NET developer? Everybody .NET developer? So are you familiar with Hungarian notation? Yeah. That's my preference when you actually create variables. It's having some kind of, and many of you that aren't .NET developers maybe as well, but it's a way of kind of telling what the data type is along with the name of the variable. So you know whenever you go to create an expression using this, that you already know what the data type is ahead of time. So whenever you're creating variables here on the left, I have my variables menu open. If for some reason you don't have the variables menu open, you can just right-click on the control flow and hit variables, and that'll open it up for you. I'm going to create a variable that's going to store the location of each of my files that are coming out of that location. So I will call this one, using Hungarian notation, I'm going to prefix it with my data type. My data type is going to be a string. So I'll start it with str. And I will call it file path. And my data type I said was going to be a string. And I don't know what the variable value is yet. I'm going to find out what that is from the for each loop. Okay. The scope is actually where I could use this variable inside the package. So I have it scoped at my package name is package 4. So I could use this variable anywhere inside my package. I really should rename it, but that's fine for what we're doing. All right, so back in this for each loop, I'm going to go ahead and open it up so we can configure it. And inside the collection tab, the general doesn't really have anything other than changing the name and the description of it. But this is where the meat and potatoes of this task is. There's all kinds of different enumerators that you can select. And what these enumerators are is just what is the collection of items that you're trying to loop over. So do I want to loop over a set of files, a set of items, an ADO enumerator? All of these are different kinds of things that you can loop over. And a node list, that will be like an XML node list that you're trying to do. An SMO enumerator, so a server management object. You can loop over all sorts of different things. And you could even download additional ones, things that you want to loop over. So we just want to loop over a set of files here. Let's make it super simple here. We want to loop over a set of files. I need to tell it what the location is. So on this folder area here, I need to tell it exactly what folder I want to loop over. So I'll go ahead and browse to that. And here, I will tell it where that location is that I want to loop over. Projects, a little bit further down. So hopefully this is helpful if I have it zoomed in like this. It's a little bit more difficult for me, but it's probably worth it for you to be able to see it. All right, lesson 33. And then, okay, so that's where I want to loop over. I want to loop over any files that are in that location. And then this little files property here, this is what files I actually want to loop over. So right now, with this star.star, those are wildcards. So right now it's going to grab every file that's in there. If I only wanted to grab a particular file extension, I could take the star after the dot and say, just bring me back text files, or just bring me back CSV files. And it'll, regardless of what the file types are in there, it'll only bring back the ones with those extensions. If I want to actually look at not only the file extension, but also a particular part of the name, I could do something on the other side of the dot and say, bring me back all of the file names that start or that end with, let's say, processed. So it'll bring back all the files that are not only text files, but they also end with the word processed. All right, I just want text files here. It's fine. The other option here, the retrieve file name, this is what it's going to return back for me. So after it goes through each iteration of the loop, it's going to bring back a file name in a certain way. Fully qualified means it's going to bring back the full file name, the extension, the directory that it's in, all that information for me. Name and extension means it's only going to bring back the file name and the extension, so test.txt, and then name would just be text, whatever the name of my file is. I want the fully qualified file name because I'm going to use that in the connection string. Okay. The last step here is under the variable mappings. And with the variable mappings, what you're going to do here is actually tell it where to store that file name. Because after each time it goes to that loop, you want to take that file name and place it in your connection string. Okay. But this is one of the most forgotten portions of this little example here for a lot of people. So I'm going to bring in that variable that I created just before I started this. I wanted to store the name of my file location in that variable, so I created it intentionally for this. So I'm going to point it to it. So now, whenever I run this package, it's going to store that file name in that variable for me. All right, we'll hit OK. Now the last step that we have to do is actually make this task, or make this connection manager dynamic. So right now it's still pointing to one single file. Even though I loop over all my files inside the loop, inside my data flow it's still only pointing to one file. So because it's still only pointing to one file, it may loop 4 times, but it's going to load the same file 4 times. So to fix that, I need to change the properties of my connection manager at the bottom. So if you select or highlight that connection manager, then go on. Oh, actually, first let me ask you kind of quiz time here. This is the property I want to change right here. So that for each loop is going to give me that file name, or end that whole connection string for me. Darn, I just ruined the punchline. I want to dynamically change this property in the connection string, or in the connection manager. Gosh, I keep ruining the punchline. So if I go to the expressions in the properties window, when you have that connection manager selected and you go into the properties, you'll see there's an expression box, or an expression property over here, that you can dynamically change any one of the properties inside that connection manager, just like we could in the task. So after I ruined the punchline about 3 or 4 times, what's that?
What's the data type?
In this,
I thought that was a question.
Oh, okay. In this case, man, can I ruin the punchline anymore? I'm highlighting it. Which one of these properties do I want to change? Description? So which one is it? I heard somebody say it, I think. Connection string, right. I want to dynamically change that connection string to use the variable that I created. So if I select that connection string, hit the ellipses next to expressions again, and all I have to do is drag down that variable that we created. So you have all of your variables, including system variables, that are in your package. You'll see them under the variables list. If I drag down the file path variable, and if I try and evaluate this, it's actually not going to do anything. Anybody know why? I heard.
You didn't set a default value.
Yeah, I didn't set a default value. And another thing is because this isn't going to be evaluated until I actually run the package. Right. So this, if I had given it a default value, I would see something down here. But as soon as I run the package, that's going to be populated. So expressions are not evaluated until runtime, as well as configurations. So that's kind of another, whenever we talked about configuration files and tables here in a few moments, I'm going to get your opinion on, so yeah, which one takes precedent. So if I run this now, it's going to loop over every one of my files because I dynamically changed that connection manager property down here, or the connection string property. If I want to take a look at this and actually see it in action, I can add what's called a breakpoint. It's more of a developer tool. You can do it in SSIS as well. But a breakpoint will put a pause in your code. So it'll tell this container, after each iteration of the loop, I want you to pause. So I can see exactly what you're doing behind the scenes. So to do that, you can right-click on the container, say Edit Breakpoints. And containers actually have a special breakpoint that's just for them. And it'll allow you to create a pause after each iteration of the loop. So after each time it goes through the loop, I want to pause the package. And this way I can actually see which files are going through. So let's do that. I'll select that option. By the way, that's only on containers, that loop. So either a for each loop or a for loop. All right, so now if I run this, see my package run eventually. My package paused. If I tell it to continue, hit the continue button up top, the same as the debug button. It'll take the first file, and if I actually want to see which files it's using and actually know what's going on behind the scenes, I could use some of these windows that I have on the very, very bottom down there. It'll allow you to see. I'm sorry, I know you guys can't see that. On the very, very bottom down here. Oh, wrong tool. There we go. you could use these watch windows to actually see what variable is being populated or how the variable is changing. So I'm going to select that watch window 1 there. You could also use locals, by the way. And it looks like I've already done this example once before. Let me clear all, and I will type in our variable. Now, this is case sensitive, so if you misspell not only misspell, but if you miscase your variable like I was about to do, oops, it won't work. So I had a capital A in there, and because I had that capital A, it actually caused a problem. I didn't know what I was talking about. If I lowercase that A, it'll work. Okay, so I can see which file I'm working on right now. I'm working on file 2. If I run or hit continue again, I'll see it go to file 3. And it's red because there was something changed in the property. So the value of it changed, so it changed to red. Also notice something kind of unusual. Anybody spot something unusual about it?
Double backslash.
Yeah, double backslash. Anybody know why it does that?
C#.
Yeah. So that's a what is it? Escape sequence. Yeah, escape sequence in not only C# but the expression language is double backslash or single backslash actually means something. So if I'm trying to do a literal string where I'm telling it here's the name of my file location, and you just tell it the name, it actually needs to have the double backslashes whenever you're writing expressions. And I'm going to show you an example of that here in a moment. All right, so if I hit continue again, I should see it go to the very last file, file 4, and that should finish it. So that's how you can use one. I didn't really have very many tasks, but I was able to do the same thing over and over because they're all formatted the same, they're very similar, the data types and everything. I was able to accomplish what I wanted. Oops, not disable. Now let me see if I can actually get back on track for where I wanted to be here. All right, so variables. You've already seen me do variables. Let's actually talk about them now. So again, you're trying to avoid hard coding everything in your package. They can contain expressions, can be updated outside of the package. So a great thing about variables is anywhere you have those variables, whenever you run the package, let's say off the server, you can populate those variables from outside the package. So you don't need to actually open the package to make changes to it. So let's say you run the same set of packages over 10 different databases. If you have a variable that's stored on the connection string for that database connection manager, then you could change that inside like Management Studio. Whenever you're doing the job, you could actually point it to that variable and say, I want it to be a different property depending on which job is running it. All right, so let's take a look at those variables here. So I showed you one example. We use variables a little bit. Let's use them a little bit more here. So what I want to do, and I'll actually use the example that we have currently. I'm going to create, we'll say 2 more variables. We'll see. By the way, I'm about to do something wrong. I could already spot it. Anybody know what I just did wrong?
Wrong scope.
Yeah, I scoped it out at the task level or the container level. So you can see the scoping here. That means whatever variable I just created will only be available in that particular area. So it's scoped out at that loop, so I can't use it anywhere else inside my package. Unfortunately, there's not a way to change scope. You can't change it unless you delete it, or unless you have a third-party tool that does it. So if I try to change it, if I try to hit the drop, there's no drop-down box for scope. You have to delete it and recreate it if you do it at the wrong level. So the problem that I had there was I had this for each loop selected whenever I created the variable. If I don't have anything selected, then it'll be scoped at the package level. Okay, so it's scoped at the package level. And what I want to do here, so I talked about an example where you want to create, and maybe some of you, if this is an example that you do, then let me know. I want to create a bunch of files, or I'm going to process a bunch of files, and I want to append the date to the end of the files after I'm done with them. It's a very common example. So I need to know what the date is, what the file name is, and then I need to send it to one location whenever I'm done with it. So to do this, we're going to create a couple variables. We'll have one that's I already have one called file path. Let's just go with that. Let's use file path, and I'm going to build most of this in expressions here, because I want to show you a little bit more of what you can do with expressions before we move on to the next topic. So I have this variable here, and if I actually want to evaluate that variable to use expressions, you select it, And then in your properties menu, all the way on the right, you'll see there's a property called evaluate as expression. Meaning whatever the contents is of this variable, I want it to be evaluated as an expression. So I'm going to write an expression to populate it. Okay, so if I flip that to true, hit the expression box below it, I can then see it's going to bring me back to that same menu I had before, where I can tell it all the different expression functions that you have, the typecasting, all that. And what we want to do here is we actually want to build a file name with the data appended to it. So to do that, we're going to do a little bit of literal strings and a little bit, literal strings mean I'm doing some hard coding, and then a little bit of dynamicness here. Dynamicness, that's a word, right? So to do this, first I want to tell it what my location is. So where do I want to send this file? Whenever you're doing literal strings inside of C# or inside of the SSIS expression language, you use double quotes instead of single quotes if you're thinking T-SQL-wise. I'm going to tell it, and I'm going to intentionally make a mistake that I just pointed out a few moments ago. I'm going to tell it what my location of my file is. And let's just do that for now because I want to point out one of the things you can run into. When you have those literal strings and you have these backslashes, I just mentioned a moment ago, that backslash means something inside those double quotes. So if I try and evaluate this, it's going to bomb on me. In fact, if I had a lowercase t, it would actually put a tab in there, I think. Let me double check that. I'm pretty sure it does. If I had a lowercase t, it would put a tab there. So that backslash t actually means something. If I want to have a backslash in this literal string and the double quotes, then I need to have double backslash.
Can you put an @ sign before it?
An @ sign before?
An @ sign before the quotes?
Why would I do that?
You can do that in C#.
Oh, okay. Think of C# wise. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, you don't have to do that here. It's a good point. All right, so that double backslash now should fix my problem there. And let's go ahead and finish our value here. By the way, if you have a UNC path, then it would be quadruple backslash. So if you do want double backslash, then you need 4 backslashes. All right, so we want to tell it the name of our file. We'll call it. Actually, we'll just call our file test. So our file will be called test, and I want to have the full date. Or I want to have the date as part of my file name. So I'm going to grab the date just like we did before. And there's a couple ways to build this one out. I'm going to show the easy way for the time we have. I have get date. I could do that same typecast that we did before to get db date in here. Hopefully this zooming in helps you guys. It's not the easiest to work with, but hopefully it can at least help you see in the back. All right, so I got db date, and what else am I missing? Yeah. So let's convert it to a string now. I think I can get away with what you guys said before. I can probably put 10 in here now. Let's see if it'll let me get away with that. Oh. Am I missing a plus sign? Thank you, guys. So I'm concatenating 2 things here. I need to add to that. There we go. So I have my what's the beginning of my file name here. Now, some people cannot get away with what I've just done here. So what I've done is I have, and let me tell you why you may not be able to get away with this. Oops. I have year. Come on, type for me. Change it to yellow. You guys can't read that. Sorry, I'm trying to get fancy with this little tool here, and I make myself worse here. There we go. So I have year, month, day. If I can get away with that, that's fine. If I have to have it in a typical format where I have month first, day, then year, then you may have to do some other values up top here for converting, where you can actually convert those to individual, bring me back just my month, bring me back just my day, just my year, and then concatenate those all together. So So that may have to be another alternative if you have to change the format. But for this basic example, I should be good. I can add my file extension. And then I've got my string and whatever I want my file. So now if I run this, hopefully I just run this once a day for my situation. If I run it multiple times a day, then I don't want to convert it to a DB day. I want to keep that time on there. But in my case, I can probably get away with this if I'm just running it once a day. Okay, so that's another type of expression there. So using variables, I could have stored more than I just did in those variables. I could have had a variable for my file extension, for my file name, and then just built the rest of it out of the expressions. So I kind of went the long way, or the less dynamic way, where I had all of it placed in that one expression that I wrote. But each part of that could have actually been another variable. So my file extension here and my directory, all that could have been its own variable. Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about configurations. This is a little bit more interesting topic, hopefully. So there's a lot of recommendations for a lot of people, differing recommendations when it comes to configuration files or tables. I personally like the tables option. So what we're talking about when we're talking about configurations, it's going to let us store our connection string information, or really any property that we have inside SSIS, into either a file or on a table. So that way we can make a change on that file or table from outside of the package, and then the next time we run it, it'll replace whatever the contents is of that property with what we have in the file or table. So it helps you make changes outside of the package. So imagine you have this prototype or typical development environment where you have a dev environment, a UAT or QA, and production. You can have the one set of packages that can work across all of them as long as you have those configuration files or tables where you just flip a switch and say, okay, I'm no longer pointing to dev, I want to point at production now. So you can make it switch real quickly inside the file, and it'll apply it to all the packages when they run. So there are some problems with really both of these different options, either the file or the table. Problem with the file is it shows passwords in plain text, so they're available for anyone to see. You can, if you do a little bit of legwork, you can actually encrypt the table method. And there's some blogs out there that help you out with that. That's probably a session in itself. It can be used across multiple packages. So you could use one file and use it across all of your packages. Instead of having to imagine you have 100 different packages and you need to change one of your properties from pointing to production, or from pointing to dev to point to production. Instead of having to open up all those packages, you just make a change in one file, you're good to go. That was weak. Okay, that's better. The recommendation I usually give is to have one, and this has actually changed a little bit with R2, have one configuration file per connection manager. So all the connection managers that you have should have one file per each. I've changed a little bit on this because they fixed a problem in R2 that I didn't even realize they did until I ran across it while I was telling people not to do it. Previously, when you create a configuration file, and let's say you have multiple connections in it. So you have 10 different connections in it, and you store all of them into one file. That means that every single one of those connections has to be in all of the packages if you use that file. They've changed that in R2, and I've just ran across it on accident. So let me show you what the previous problem was. Previous problem is I have this connection manager down here, and I want to make it dynamic. Right? I want to make it so it switches depending on what environment I'm in. So to create configuration files or tables, you'll go right-click in the middle of your control flow and say Package Configurations. You enable Package Configurations and hit Add. And it's going to take you through this wizard that'll help you create the configuration file for you, or table. Hit Next. The default here is to use an XML file. That's what I want to show you first anyway, so I'll leave that configuration type, whatever that says right now, XML. And then you give the name of the file here and whatever location you want it to be stored in. I'm just going to call it SQL Saturday. SQL Sat. Now if I hit Next, it actually points that file and it adds an extension on it and everything for me. It points it to whatever the location is of the project that I'm working in. So I created the project in this C class folder, and so it just stored that at the same location. If I don't want it to be stored in the same location, I need to tell it specifically where I want it to be stored. Some people also like to use, especially when they use configuration tables, is use environmental variables, meaning I have a variable that's stored on the operating system that I can now use inside SSIS. So depending on what operating system I'm in, I want to point it to the same folder no matter where I'm at. Okay, we'll hit next. Now I have available to me every single property that's inside SSIS. I could potentially use it to be stored in this file. What's most typical is you use the connection string information from your connection managers. So if I scroll on up, I'll find my connection manager here. And inside the properties of that connection manager, I could tell it I want the connection string. Or if this was a database, I really need to show what I wanted to show here. I really need more than one connection here. But if I had more than one connection, I could store all of those into one file. The problem with that previously, in fact, let me go back and show this, because it's not gonna error out on me now because I have R2 on here. So let me create one more new connection here. And go back to what we just saw, so I'm not going to talk about this again. So I could store both of these on here if I wanted to. The problem with doing that I'll just store the server names, fine. The problem with doing that in anything before R2 is if I remove one of those connection managers after it's being stored in the file, it's going to bomb on me every single time before I even start the package. So let's see, connection string here. Give the configuration some kind of name. That's the last step. It doesn't really matter what you name it. But if I ran this package now, it'll run just fine. But if I take out one of those connection managers, it's going to bomb on me because that file is expecting to see both of them. R2 fixed that problem. I was a little surprised that they did anything in SSIS for R2, but they did fix it. So if I take one of these out, let's say I take out let's take this one out here. And previously when I would run this, it would bomb. It wouldn't even try and run it. It would throw an error and throw in an exception before I even ran it. Now they'll let you run it. So my previous complaint about storing all of your configurations into one file, I don't care if you do that now because it works. Before it wouldn't even work unless you had every single one of those connections in every single one of the packages that used the file. So you can get away with it in R2 anyways. You do see the error though when you go back to the configurations. So if I right click, go back to the package configurations, hit edit on this one, I'm going to see that error that I would typically see as soon as I ran the package. It shows up here now. But it'll let you run the package. So just be aware if you're not using R2, you're going to have that problem. You will not be able to run whenever you're having that situation that I just showed. So the other option that you have is configuration tables. And this is my preferred method, I said. Configuration tables stores everything on the server. So you have an actual table that has all that information stored for you. So I can optionally, instead of using the XML configuration, I can remove that one. Let's add another one here. This time the configuration type is going to be SQL Server. Let's say I need to create a new connection. So because I don't have a SQL Server connection or an OLEDB connection down in my connection managers, I need to create one real quick first. So let me create one. I just deleted one. I'll put it to AdventureWorks, it's fine. I'm sure you guys have seen AdventureWorks a few times today. If the table, it's going to create a standard table for me if I don't already have one that exists. So if I select from the configuration table and I don't see the table that I need, then I can create it here. So it's looking for a specific table here. And it'll automatically create it for you if you run this quick script. Okay, I have that table now. You're going to give it what's called a configuration filter. And all this really does is make it easy for you to filter out things. So configuration filter confuses a bunch of people. This is actually you putting a name to this configuration that you're about to do. So it's going to create a record inside this table, this SSIS configurations table, and we're going to be able to filter out and actually find just that one by whatever we type in here. So if I want this one to be called, let's call it file extract. I hit next. Same screen that we saw before. I need to tell it what property I want to store there. I can store all the properties if I want, or I could just pick one. I'll just pick the connection string. Hit next. I can give this a name if I want. Let's call it file config, and then hit finish. Now, if I go look inside Management Studio, I'm going to see a table that has that record that's storing that connection for me, or storing that configuration for me. All right, and that should be in AdventureWorks DW here, called SSIS configuration. So if I look at this table, I'm only going to have one record in it right now. But that filter expression, or that configuration filter is right here. That's what, if I want to update this somehow, I could use that in the where clause to update. I have the property stored here. And then, more importantly, you guys need to stop yawning. No, I'm just kidding. More importantly, I have the package path. So this is actually the location or the property that I'm changing. So if I expand this whole thing out, that's how SSIS interprets those properties. So if I want to change this property from outside the package, let's say in a SQL agent job, I would need to know this whole thing here to be able to change that property value. Yeah, go ahead.
How do you tell which server to connect to get configuration for the server you're connecting to?
Yeah, and this is kind of a subjective thing. Some people like to have one table on each of the servers. Some people like to put them all on one and then filter it out.
And how do you configure it to tell it to go to this server to get my
Oh, okay. You would likely use the environmental variable. Yeah, you can pass in a value here. So if you say package configurations on this bottom area, there's an environmental variable. And so each machine that you're running this on, you could have that stored in the environmental variables, and it just points it to it. That's what a lot of people do. Yeah.
Can you dynamically set the filter? So say you wanted to distinguish between production and test databases on the same server.
That's interesting. So can I dynamically change this? Well, when you create the filters initially, you do them yourself. Thank you. So wow, I only have 10 minutes left already. I'm slow. All right, so, you can't. So you have to actually create those yourself first. All right, so let me see what else I have left here, guys. I want to make sure I get. All right, so let's take a vote. What do you want to see? Let's see what I have left. All right, so I have passing a value between a parent package and a child package, and I also have showing you how to run packages in DTExec. Now let me just briefly talk about this in case we don't have time to get to it. That's a little funky slide there. So the reason why, and there's many reasons why, but first of all, a big reason why you may use DTExec, this is the command line prompt for running DTS packages, is you may have something that can only work in 32-bit. So let's say you're working on a 64-bit machine and you have a Excel driver or Access or some kind of legacy task that only works in 32-bit mode. If that's the case, then you actually have to run DTExec, and you have to run the 32-bit version of the DTExec. For some reason, there's a lot of things that haven't been upgraded to 64-bit inside SSIS, so this isn't a very uncommon thing. So anytime you have Excel or Access, or there's actually several tasks, some legacy tasks that are kind of carryover from DTS, they only work in 32-bit, which is kind of silly because the whole reason for upgrading from DTS to SSIS is because you're going to be able to use all the 64-bit stuff. So that's one case why you may use DTExec, especially in 2005. In 2008, there's a nice little checkbox in the SQL agent job that says run as 32-bit, and it does all the work for you. If you're using 2005, then you need this big script that I have right here to be able to run your package, where it points to the 32-bit folder or the x86 folder of SQL Server, and then gets the x86 version of DTExec to pass in. So, because I know we don't have time to get to this, for DTExec, there are so many different kinds of things that you can pass into it. There's all different kinds of arguments. So if you look on MSDN for DTExec, you'll get pages and pages and pages of different kind of arguments that you can pass into it. The main one that you would be interested in is this set command. And what that'll allow you to do is pass values into the package. So if you have a package that has variables, you could use that set command right there to pass in values into a variable. So after you say set, you tell it here the name of the variable, and then give it the value right after that. So I'm trying to pass in the value of my new value. And one big thing about this particular function is that V has to be capital V. It's kind of silly, but it won't work unless it's a capital V. Okay, so for the last 5 minutes we have, we are going to look at parent-child packages here. So I can show this pretty quickly. I'm going to create 2 packages. In fact, I already have them created. How about that? I have one package that all it has is a script task in it, and it's super simple. It's going to take this variable that I have that's called child, and it's going to put it in a message box. So if I run this package, I'll see a message box pop up that says child. Anytime now. There it goes. So I got a message box that says child, and all it's doing is it's reading that variable and showing it in a message box. So script tasks, if you haven't used them a whole lot, they're just ways of extending SSIS. You can bring essentially anything you can do in .NET, you can bring to SSIS with a script task. And all I'm doing is doing a basic message box. What I want to do, though, I have this parent package, and I have a parent variable here. So all this parent package does is it runs the other package. That's all it does. But what I want it to do is when it runs that other package, I want it to pass in the value from this variable up top here into the other. So take this variable, shove it into the other one. And I can show you it's completed, and then I'll show you how I did it. So if I run it from this parent package, I know why it's running so slow. If we have time, I'll tell you why. So it actually ran, you can see right now, if you look on the tabs, that I'm on the child package, but it took in the value that I have from the parent package. So it just passed a value between the two. Now, how I did that, you have to configure it in the child package. So the parent package is pretty simple. I have this execute package task, and then I have the variable here that populates the parent variable. Okay. So the parent package is simple. Variable, execute package task. The child package looks pretty basic. In fact, the configuration is not that bad. I have a script task that populates or gives me a message box. I have a variable that is populating the message box with a value. But to configure it to pass values between, I have to configure the child package to accept from the other package. So you do all the configuration for this on the child package. That's the hard part to remember. And the moniker to remember this is if you have kids always want something from you, right? Same case here. The child package wants something from you, and it wants that configuration. So under the package configurations, we're going to do a different kind of configuration this time called a parent package variable. So what this parent package variable is doing, all it's going to do, it's really simple to configure. You select parent package variable, tell it the name of the variable from the parent package, and then you tell it where, on the next screen, you tell it where you want to put it. So if I hit next here, it'll ask me, all right, this is the variable, where do you want me to put it? And that's not good. Come on. Oh, did I hit help? There we go. I'm not sure what I hit. All right, so up top, I want to take that variable and put it into my other variable. So I'm going to select the child variable, tell it to put it in the value of the child variable, and then that way, when I run the parent package, it's going to pass that value into the child package. Now, if I run the child package by itself, it's not going to know anything about the parent package.
Can you only pass one? Can you only pass one variable from the parent to the child?
You could do, if you want to do more, then you just have to create another configuration. So you just create more than one. So right now I just have one, but if I wanted to do two, you have to do one variable at a time, I guess, is how I should say it. Okay, I'll hit next. Now the big question is, all right, I passed a value from my parent package to my child package. How do I take a child variable, or how do I take a variable from my child package and pass it back? There's not a nice configuration for that. You have to do, more times I've had to do that, you have to maybe write it to a table and then read it back in the parent package. There's not a nice, easy way to do that. It was I think you could actually do it easier in DTS. You could do that fairly easily. Unfortunately, SSIS, they didn't carry over that nice functionality. Okay, so again, if I run this child package by itself, it only has the child variable. If I run it from the parent package, it passes a value to the child one. All right, we got 2 minutes. I got a question for you. For the data warehouse, web house, what did I just grab? Oh my goodness, you guys don't want this. The data web house, I thought it said warehouse, so I just grabbed it. Question is, let's see, think of a good one here. Okay, all right. This one you guys will get pretty quickly. So, what is the command line prompt for running SSIS packages? Yeah, I saw his hand first. There you go. Enjoy Webhouse. All right, guys, if you have any questions, I have my cards up here. I did record the session, so you'll be able to catch that. And I can hang around for a few minutes if you do have questions. Again, I do have a flight I got to run to, but I will hang around for a few minutes if you have questions. Thank you for coming.